It never ceases to amaze me, the wonder of the carrot takes 2 years to produce seeds, as does the leek. There's so much in it that we've lost because people have lost that sort of backyard farming or backyard vegetable growing. But I think that the younger generations are starting to look at that and say, we need to do more of that.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, good middle of the night. Whenever you happen to be listening to this podcast, it is Dirty Linen and I am Dani Valent. Really thrilled to be with you. Always love the privilege of being in your ears to tell and listen to some food stories. Dirty Linen is celebrating 5 years of existence. I do have trouble celebrating my own milestones, so I'm really trying to lean into it, and I hope you'll join me in the little party. I don't know what the party is, but it's all of us just acknowledging 5 years together. So grateful to all of my guests, which definitely and especially includes today's guest because she's probably been on the podcast more than anyone else apart from me. Annie Smithers is a restaurateur, a farmer, an author, a food identity and a fantastic communicator, an agitator. Annie Smithers, restaurateur at Fermier in Trentham. Welcome to Dirty Linen.
That makes me feel really greedy, like I'm the greedy girl to get on the podcast more often than anybody else.
Well, I think it's my fault because I keep asking you back because there is so much to talk about. Last time you were on the pod, it was to lament the situation around your water rights. You grow vegetables for the restaurant on your property, Babington Park, not too far from the restaurant. But regulations, well, following a unfortunate dobbing in, you discovered that you were not actually allowed to water said vegetables and flowers and fruits from the copious amount of water that was on your property. So that's where we left the story.
Yeah, that was a sad Annie day, wasn't it? It was a very sad Annie. It's still... in a sense, the whole conversation in my own head about water has become more and more important with this big long dry that we have. The 6 months sort of from late November through to, when we've had a bit of rain, has, just fine-tuned the narrative about water even more. And, when I listen to a lot of the podcast, or a lot of the guests that you have on, is the extraordinary importance of water, but also the immense fragility of our food system, and that something is going terribly wrong with both our regulators and, the way that some people farm, the way that other people farm. And look, a lot of these laws are in place to make sure that water is not used incorrectly. However, as we discussed last time, it does mean that it is a law that is quite old. We don't have a nimble government system that keeps pace with, really keeps pace with change in technology, change in people's attitudes to these things, change to the market, change to how people grow food. But we have discovered that I think it has come down to leaning on people and making a lot of noise, is that I am very pleased to say that Susan and I have been granted a water licence, that we have bought 2 megalitres from my lovely friend and Suffolk lamb grower and farmer Bruce across the way. So we've bought 2 megalitres of water from him, and we have been granted a licence to water our vegetables. So there you go. There's a little happy end to the story.
I mean, we love happy stories. We love people being able to water the vegetables that they grow for their little restaurants in regional Australia. I suppose, we will put links to the other podcasts that we've done together, Annie, but for, I suppose, people who've come to this conversation cold and dry, I suppose my investigations into this topic made me think a lot about water. And, it is important that water is regulated. You can't have people using water willy-nilly in a country that, needs to use it very carefully, and no time more than now and into the future where climate change is accelerating and very much upon us. Having said that, it does seem like the laws are not fit for purpose. So there are people such as yourself who've bought a property with the idea of growing food to supply a small restaurant, which is very much the type of, I guess, nexus between produce and person that we celebrate in this country. But the laws were not supporting your sensible use of water for this purpose. So there's just this disconnect, a sort of historical lag, which, there's a lot of politics around it, which we touched on in our last chat, and I'll let people go back and find all that. But it's so gratifying and seems as it should be that a sensible solution has been found, and I'm so happy that you can water your carrots.
I'm very happy to water the carrots. At the moment, the wild ducks are eating all the carrots because there's no feed for anything anywhere, and so there's a lot going on in the food system at the moment, and I feel that it is a topic that you champion incredibly well, but there is a disconnect between the urban dweller and there's country people who actually work at these sort of things. And more often than not, there's always some sort of crisis on the horizon. And I was having a chat to a Melbourne restaurateur who gets his vegetables from a couple of the smaller farmers that come into Melbourne and supply the restaurant market now. And, one of the growers is having, enormous problems with the extraordinary wild duck population. They are eating everything in her acreage. And it's not something that we actually think about when you go to the greengrocer or you go to the supermarket or wherever you buy your fruit and vegetables, or if you're in a restaurant, for me, who is obsessed by these things, I look at things on my plate and think, oh, I wonder how that was grown, or that was grown in very sandy soil because it's grown nice and long and straight, But we need to, we need to look at our food a lot more carefully and start to go back to understanding how it's been grown, so that we also can motivate, politicians and lawmakers and things to sort of, keep up with what is happening. And I think that you did tell me what you wanted to talk about today, and it ties into another, wacky thing in the life of Annie Smithers, which is that when you look at, say, one of the things that I love about France is that the extraordinary market scene that you find across all of France. Now, of course, they're dealing with centuries of tradition and land ownership and farming practices and all of the things that, as a recently colonised country we don't get to have. But they also work in a system where a lot of farming is subsidised, and the government is incredibly aware of how important the food system is, culturally to that country and for their heritage. And so not only do they protect their history with their subsidies into farming, their awareness of farming and their protectionist, movements about keeping things where they should be and things. And we don't have that culture. And I suppose one of the big questions that I think about is moving forward, does Australia need to, start thinking about, where does food sit culturally in our existence, or are we just going to turn into some sort of hybrid American state that is full of ultra-processed food and supermarkets, and we get less and less access to carefully farmed, nutritious, minimally processed food?
So, Annie, you touched on it, but let's just spell it out. So recently you were given a very special honour, the Order of Agricultural Merit, by the French ambassador for your outstanding contribution to French gastronomy in Australia. Kate Reid from Loon Croissanterie was also given that same honour on the night. Congratulations, or félicitations.
Thank you so much. I think I couldn't think of anyone better to share the night with than Kate Reid. We were like a pair of giggling Gerties, not out of disrespect, but it was all incredibly overwhelming in a lot of ways. So it's it's a very strange thing to be awarded a medal. That's a funny thing. It's a bit overwhelming. But on the same, unfortunately couldn't be there, but Yvonne from Long Paddock Cheese, so just up the road from me in Castlemaine, was also awarded one. And it is it is that cultural heritage about food that is honoured, and this award goes back to the late 1800s, and it's about the sense that agriculture is fundamentally important to the French. The French narrative and the French psyche, because from agriculture comes gastronomy and all of those, side shoots that come across from things. So whether it's fleece and fibre and, the whole, fashion side or workwear side or clothes side of it, through to food and all the extraordinary, directions that food goes into with agriculture. So it was incredibly overwhelming, but also, again, it makes me realise that, to stand up for small food in a way, small food, slow food, all the things that I think we have to remember are just as important as feeding the masses.
Absolutely. Well, it's really great. I was lucky enough to be with the French ambassador. I think it was that same day, but at the French cultural space, which is there's one in Melbourne. So I was, had a little chat with the ambassador, or perhaps I should say an audience, where I was somewhat put on the spot because I didn't really know what I was.
Oh, no, he's a chatty.
Super chatty and, and very into food, as you would expect. But yeah, we spoke a little bit about, French gastronomy and French culture and why is it that French people care so much about food. And he spoke about school lunches and how the French kids are given a proper meal in the middle of the day. They sit down and they eat it, that it's just normal and natural. And he was very taken aback when he moved to Australia by the idea of the lunchbox and that it was still a bit of a struggle to, think about lunch for his children like that. I mean, there's nothing wrong with a good lunchbox. I suppose the way food is delivered isn't necessarily a sign of, I don't know, how much you care about it, but it was certainly one cultural difference that he found very striking. Another thing that I've done recently, Annie, is on earlier this week I was really privileged to be the MC for the Mornington Peninsula Food Forum. That was a gathering of 100 or so, mostly farmers, small farmers, but other people who are part of the food supply chain, interested foodies, a few educators, a little bit of government, and hosted by the Mornington Peninsula Shire and their agroecology strategy. And the morning was framed by First Nations thinking and knowledge and people. And I think, as you're talking about the knowledge and just ways of thinking about gastronomy, I feel like we've got that here with First Nations knowledge and ways of thinking about food. We're actually so lucky and so well placed to think about food in a completely different way from mainstream Western culture. But there's just so much listening and learning still to be done to get there. One thing that really struck me so deeply was that both Lionel Louch, who runs this organisation called Living Cultures on the Mornington Peninsula, and Dominique Chen, who's an academic, an artist and researcher based in Queensland, and has a website course called Growing on Country, and I'll put all these links in the show notes if I can remember everything that we're touching on. They both spoke about plants as family, and the idea of, Dominique had asked a country person, what is the Gamilaroi word for gardening, and they used the word for family, and I just thought that was so profound to think about the plants as your brothers and sisters, and then cousins and grandparents. And as soon as you do that, of course, you think about the soil. And Tammy Jonas, who I know is, not that far from you, and a part of the Australian Food Sovereignty Alliance and a farmer of pigs, and thinker about all these things. She put up a map of the Aboriginal countries of Victoria, and just spoke about that it was the job of the Dja Dja Wurrung to look after the water so that the rain would fall on the next place, cleanly and properly, and just this sense of connection and sense of place and anchoring in the land that I feel like there's so much to learn from.
And when you think of, our land here, which is the Dja Dja Wurrung land, it is the land of the underground springs. So again, going back to, yes, we've been allowed to use a water licence, but those springs that feed the lake that we draw from, they are the springs that then go down and feed the head of the Loddon River. Now, the Loddon River makes its way through, so many First Nations on its way through the watercourse. Is that it is imperative that water is cared for at the source, and we are at the source. So there is, a lot of sense in sort of don't take too much. But on the flip side of that is it important to take it for small-scale agriculture or horticulture, or is it important to give it to people who are not farming and just keeping their land green or nice or whatever they want to do with it? So there are so many questions and so much learning to do. But I think that, that whole, that beautiful notion that plants, whether they are plants that, so we have a huge manna gum at home. Now, because we're 770 above sea level, she collects the water. And because we sit in the clouds a lot, is you can come out, there's been no rain, but she has a swamp underneath her because that is her role in her, she collects the water. But I think about, she has her place. She's just, she's a shelter tree. She's a beautiful tree. She's a water collecting tree. There's so many other plants and things in our garden, some of which, obviously a lot of European things for vegetables and things. But even thinking about the fact that if you look at, if I look at my broccolis at the moment, or I look forward to looking at my artichokes, is we already know that an artichoke or a broccoli has a nonna, and then it has mamas, and then it's got bambinos on the outside. So, culturally, we're very, once you get into it, so many of our vegetables and things have that. They have these funny little names and funny little theories behind them that indicate that they're family. And it is it's a privilege to care for them in the way where you see them through until they produce food, and then you start again. It never ceases to amaze me, the wonder of, that the carrot takes 2 years to produce seeds, as does the leek. There's so much in it that we've lost because people have lost that sort of backyard farming or backyard vegetable growing. But I think that the younger generations are starting to look at that and say, we need to do more of that.
I think you're right. I think, there is a hunger for that connection. There was I'm really just saying this because it was funny and it struck me, but there was another speaker at the Mornington Peninsula Food Forum that talked about people who buy their weekenders, their country pad, and I know that's a lot of what is in your region as well, and they come up on the weekend and they have his and hers lawnmowers, and they get out on the lawnmowers for an hour and think they've been farming, and there is, I suppose, there's being in the country and there's being in the country.
Well, and again, it's sort of over 30 years of being up here is there, then and a lot of those people can be incredibly good to our economies. They're the people that, will come to my restaurant. They're the people that, pay the wages of the people that work with me. But sometimes you'll hear them say, oh, we're actually selling the property because we found that all we ever did was come up here and mow the grass. And it's sort of like, well, that's sort of what happens is that if you have an acre of grass, you've got to care for it. I think there's a disconnect between these things don't just happen. And, we've all watched enough dystopian TV to see those visions of sort of what happens if a city's denuded of people and how quickly the plants take over, you don't come up to your country house for 4 weeks in the middle of spring and, oh, man, you've got a world of pain for the rest of the season.
And I suppose, it's not just about being in the country. If I think about, I'm in the city with a tiny little patch of soil, and I mean, there are ways of being connected to what's happening, even with pots on the balcony. But I think that magic of growing not only gives you an appreciation for other people that are doing it on a larger scale, but also does connect you with seasons and natural cycles, and perhaps have a little sense of the extended family of seeds and plants and roots and microbes that is keeping us all alive, basically. Yeah,
it's amazing. It's a beautiful world.
I love that. So, Annie, tell me about what's happening at Du Fermier. What's looming large for you at the moment?
What have we done? Oh, we've done a little. We did a little refit of the restaurant. That makes it sound very grand, but basically we put a new dresser in, and I changed the chairs, and I painted a wall a different colour. So that's pretty exciting. I think when you've been somewhere for 12 years, and the sense is that we don't want to change it, but we also want people to think that it's still loved and not taken for granted. So we've had a little refresh. We've had a little refresh at the shop. We've stopped doing dinners for the winter because the roads are pretty awful. and it's cold and dark. And so we're back doing we do a funny Friday night takeaway offering for local people of 2 courses for 2 people for $85. So that's a bit, that brings a lot of smiles to faces. So we love doing that. And generally, look, it's been an incredibly cold winter so far. We're knuckling down this week to the spectre of black ice for, probably the next 3 or 4 days on the road. So if you do come up here, at this time of year, be really careful on the roads if you're travelling, early in the morning, because they're pretty treacherous. So it is, we had a few flurries of snow yesterday, which is always makes the cold slightly interesting. But at this stage, it's just bunkering down for the winter. There's lots of cabbages in the garden. The purple sprouting broccoli hasn't started yet. We dug the Jerusalem artichokes today, and there's sort of everything's moving quite slowly out there, but it's an incredibly busy time for pruning and tidying. So, fruit trees, all the currants and raspberries. Now that we have a license and I don't have to operate outside of the law or be civilly disobedient, I did get pretty excited and planted a truckload of tulip bulbs this year, so that I'm looking. The winter in some ways, the winter can't last long enough because there's actually so many jobs to do out there in the winter. And days like yesterday and Tuesday, where it was snowing and sleeting and between 1 and 3 degrees for the whole day, you don't get much done outside. So. But while the winter isn't quite long enough to get everything done, you can't wait for spring because so much has gone in already that we're just waiting and waiting and waiting to see what it looks like in about 3 months' time when we come out the other side of the cold.
I mean, Annie, as you reflect on your period of time as an outlaw, and you're being welcomed back into legality, how do you reflect on it? And how do you reflect on it, and how might other people who are facing similar challenges, what might their mindset be?
Well, when I think about the importance of water, and as I said at the beginning, it's a tough issue at the moment because we've had so little water fall from the sky. But I also note that today we picked the last of my special radicchios that, we plant those at summer solstice, and last week was winter solstice, and there's all of these narratives that go with the growing of food that are, for me, intensely romantic but also incredibly practical. Is I can remember the radicchios are 6 months old because it's winter solstice when I planted them just before Christmas. But the period of time has been, look, Susan, my wife, did most of the grunt work. I've found, it's taken an enormous amount out of us to fight this fight. On a personal level, it's really, really been dogged, and it's persistence and it's pushing, and, you were great. A whole lot of other people were great in pushing it and keeping it alive. But the personal toll of this is quite high. Like, we're really tired. It's made us very, very tired getting through to this point. And we don't know exactly why we got through the process or how we got through the process. And I hope that it means that other people if they get pulled up by the water authorities or by the government, is they keep pushing and they keep sticking their head up and they just keep being annoying. The more annoying I think you can be to your local members of parliament and things, the quicker they want to get you off their desk. So it is, and the more people that get a licence will be a groundswell so that, people like Tammy Jonas and the Australian Food Sovereignty Alliance can say, look, these are all the people you've given licences to. It's now time you change the law for all of us. We need to move. And as I said then and I say now, we are a quarter of a way through the 21st century. These laws are 20th century laws. We have to be able to adapt more quickly to this, because big business does, seed growers do. Everybody is chasing, the story from Simon Schulz last week about Canadian superannuation companies buying prime farming land to plant trees for carbon offset in, prime, agricultural and dairy land, is if they can foresee what they need to do, our government needs to work harder and faster to, look at Australia's short-term, medium-term and long-term farming practices, because not only do we have to protect, our water, our soil health and things, is we also need to learn from First Nations. But while we learn from the First Nation practices and all the things that they were able to work this land for, is we also need to accept the fact that we're here and adapt our farming techniques and our needs to the 21st century so that we can preserve as much as possible, so that we can keep farming for generations, as opposed to saying in 25 or 30 years we've only got 20 seasons left and then we've ruined the soil. So it's a huge social question. And, as you and I have discussed privately before, is that, I don't have it in me to stand for government. I don't think my mental health would cope with it. But it is, for those that stand or those who feel that they can make a difference, is I think getting through into government and actually making changes and working at the coalface of change and the coalface of lawmaking is something that, if we really want to change things, we do need to, pressure and become the people who make the laws.
Yeah, very well said. And yeah, I think every time I do a podcast with you, I come away thinking, I think I better run for Parliament. So we better not chat too often, or maybe I will. But yeah, I think, they're big questions. And
if you run for Parliament, I'll come and be a parliamentary secretary.
Well, that's already sounding like more fun than most people seem to have in Parliament. But yeah, I remember the chat with Simon Schulz we had on the podcast a couple of weeks ago. And it does seem like it's about what sort of society we want to be. And I know that was sort of, a sort of framing question for the water rights battle you had. It's like, don't we want to be a sort of society where small farmers can water their vegetables and then serve them to people in a lovely restaurant? I think we do want to be that society. Don't we want to be a society where people can farm, have dairy cattle and look after them properly with water and wash their dairies out without having to buy water every day? Don't we want to be that sort of society? So how do we value it and create it and protect it? And yeah, don't we want to be the sort of society that learns from the tens of thousands of years of knowledge of living here that, exists if only it's listened to more? And yeah, of course, like applied to the world that we all are sharing now. It's a big question, but I feel like there's ways of walking forwards to find the answers.
And sometimes we do have to look a little bit backwards to move forwards. And I think, again, when you spoke to Jono from Brooklands, I came up to this region in 1992. So, look, we're talking 32, 33 years ago now. It's not that long ago. It's a lot, but it's not really. In my life, it's probably going to be a third of my life. In the eternal scheme of things, it's a tiny little drop. But 30 years ago, we had abattoirs everywhere. So there were little abattoirs absolutely everywhere. Now, I could take my geese to Charlton to have a dozen geese killed and get them back on a transport vehicle. I think Judy Crow, I took them there for Christmas. Judy Crow used to use that particular abattoir for her suckling pigs. And it was like this wild, weird Christmas decoration with all the suckling pigs in the hanging up. But it was a time where all of these things still existed. Now, that's 30 years ago. It's not that long ago that we were a state that was proliferated by small abattoirs, that we had, all sorts of different things. And I think, unfortunately for me, so much of it comes back to greed and wealth management. And the thing is that everything has to make a buck. So it's not something that, say, someone like Jono will point out, but it's something that, say, I'm incredibly aware of with Nat and Jono at Brooklands, is that these people kill 4 pigs a week and 2 head of cattle a fortnight, and they exist on that. That is their world. That is not a lot, but it is enough to sustain them. And I think, part of, what I would love to see on a societal level is that we take what we need, just what we need, and that's enough. We don't need constantly more and more and more. And there's, the turning over for wealth management is just what's the point of having wealth management if we're all going to eat ultra-processed food that's probably going to kill us before we get to 50?
Yeah. Well, again, that's a big question. And I think one that you tackle so well in your books is just those, I guess, experiments with scale and busyness and largeness and trying to do more. And then, as you say, a recipe for a kinder life. It's there are other ways of doing things. So I think you're living that out, which is great. It's a big battle. I don't know. I'm just seeing myself in the Legislative Assembly and just thinking, could I do that? I don't know. But Annie, we better wrap it up before I throw my hat in the ring. Always so nice to talk to you.
It's always lovely to talk with you. Thank you so much for checking back in to see how we're going. We're battle bruised, but we are compliant. So it's a good day in de Fermier and Babington Parkland today.
Well, I'm sure that Ambassador Pierre-Andre Ambert would be delighted if we toasted compliance with the best champagne. So perhaps we can do that separately, if not together, but hopefully together before too long.
All right. Thank you so much, Dani.
Thanks, Annie. This is Dirty Linen, and I'm Dani Valent. We air the issues that the hospitality industry finds hard to talk about, hearing from different people with unique perspectives. We want to hear from you as well. If you have something that needs to be said about a topic, get in touch so we can include your perspective. Contact us at dirtylinen@deepintheweeds.com.au or hit us up on Insta @Dirty Linen Podcast. We can't wait to hear from you.